So the full pre-patch is now out, and we have access to the invasion.
Yes, the invasions are actually pretty good. I'm surprised. I thought they'll be like, a bit throwaway, a bit boring. Maybe they will be in a couple weeks, but for now, there's so many cool things with them that I didn't expect.
Well, not only do we get to go back to zones that we've never been to in like the past 5 years or something.
Yeah.
Which is quite nice, but it's fun, man. It is actually quite fun, and the PvP, I think the main reason why it is fun is the PvP wars. It's hilarious when you get to a boss, and the bosses are brutal as shit for the people that haven't done them yet. They do a lot of damage, a lot of AoE damage to like everyone, and you're not in groups unless you've made your own, so you're just with random people, and no one's healing you, and you're slowly going lower and lower in health. And what do you do when you're on low health when you're on a boss fight and no one's healing you? You try and avoid the mechanics and you run away from the boss. So you've got all these people 100 yards away from the boss, right behind everyone. And as the opposite faction, you can just go back there and slaughter everyone. There's a tip for everyone. If you get to the boss, go behind the opposite group, the other faction, and just slay all the people on 10% health.
Don't do that.
Do it. It's fucking hilarious.
But yeah,
you're inherently helping the raid because they're not doing anything anyway. When you kill them, they come back with more health.
That is very true. And the thing is that I feel bad for melee because I'm playing ranged, especially as a hunter, and like barrage now is a single target damage increase, so you use it like off cooldown regardless if there's only one target. You just annihilate all the melee. Like there'll probably be like a 680 like demon hunter who's just come out the starting zone all happy, like, oh, let's go fight the legion, and you just get annihilated by some fucking hunter on the other team because they're sidewindering you and shit. It's a really interesting side of it that I didn't expect, because I never really see Alliance out in the wild that often, and now like I'm seeing shit tons of them when doing these things, and it is really fun. And generally what you're doing, it's pretty neat. It'll probably get boring after a while, but it's definitely, you go into all these zones.
I think the rewards are really good as well.
And it doesn't take too long as well. You're probably, 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes to complete an invasion or something like that. So it's really, and you can AFK through it if you want to.
And they're up for 4 hours at the moment. And then, you can do them once every 4 hours.
Yeah, and they're supposed to be getting quicker and quicker.
Apparently so, yeah.
So it's going to
almost give the idea that, the Legion's coming, the expansion's coming.
Yeah. And the rewards are cool. I think.
Yeah, the rewards are right. I think it would be nice. Maybe there's a little bit more rewards.
But
I really do appreciate the transmog. I think the transmog looks awesome. Actually, using some of it on my shaman because it goes with a set that I was working on. So yeah, I'm really happy with that. And also the gear that you do get is around 700 item level, which is amazing for obviously alts that you've not bothered for the entire expansion with, or demon hunters. So you can get your demon hunter relatively decently geared, super fucking quick.
Yeah.
Without having to step in a raid whatsoever. So yeah, it's basically Belfour and crack. And of course, we have the Broken Shore. Having the Broken Shore is amazing. It's just one more thing that you don't have to do when the expansion comes out.
Yeah, I'm not, although the Broken Shore the first time I did it was kind of neat, it's not cool having to do it 4 or 5 times because I'm going to be leveling all these alts on the first week.
Well, one annoying thing is that they made it so you actually do have to do it on the alts. If you remember on the beta, you just do it once, then you never have to do it again.
Oh, yeah, but I think that was just so people could get on with testing.
I was hoping they'd keep it.
I was really hoping they'd keep it as well. Yeah, you used to be able to skip the Broken Shore. But no, you do have to do it now. At least you don't have to do it on Demon Hunters. But yeah, a lot of people enjoy the Broken Shore. I think it's cool once, and then it's kind of like meh. But
watching the same film twice.
The cinematics are really good.
They are
shout
very good,
outs to Terran and his team. Did a good job with that. So yeah, pre-patch generally has been really good, but Demon Hunters are out, and they're fun as fuck.
Demon Hunters are extremely fun. Obviously, we don't have access to all the talents, so we don't really see them all completely.
Yeah.
But even as they are right now, you've got the core fundamentals of the class, which is double jump, dash, and the
backflip
and the backflip thing. Yeah, just those abilities make it so much fun. So yeah, we've been leveling up those. But of course, with the introduction of Demon Hunters and Hunters also now playing Survival, we now have 9 melee DPS specs in the game. And in contrast, we still only have 6 ranged DPS.
Yeah.
Now, in normal mode raids, you can have almost any composition you like. If you have players that can deal with the mechanics that are thrown at you, you can almost certainly kill the encounter. You don't need to be really sick at damage. You don't need to be really sick at healing or anything like that. You just need to be able to not die. If you can do that, the boss will fall over. It's almost exactly the same for Heroic, except, of course, you just need slightly better gear, slightly more damage, slightly more healing. But again, there isn't these super tight DPS checks or healing checks or anything like that. It's just, can you deal with the mechanics? So in those 2 difficulties, if you did want to have all 9 melee DPS specs, you probably could. It wouldn't be too problematic, especially if you're playing 30-man. However, the problem is really with these 9 specs is that as soon as you hit Mythic, and, well, let me explain it really. So the 9 specs as a whole, so this is all the 9 specs averaged, are worse than ranged DPS as a whole. Any fights that require sort of large abrupt movement or require you to move to a target that's any location other than melee, you're going to struggle as a melee DPS in comparison to a ranged DPS. The gap between ranged and melee DPS these days is a lot smaller than what it once was, especially since melee classes these days have way more mobility, apart from, say, Death Knights.
Poor Death Knights.
Death Knights don't really have shit. And also the fights, I'd say, are better designed. They're just kinder to melee in general. And of course, ranged DPS can't cast on the move like they used to in Mists of Pandaria. That also closed the gap a bit, but the gap still exists. There are plenty of fights where melee as a group simply aren't as useful as ranged DPS. A really, really sick example of this is Blackhand Mythic.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much the only melee DPS that were considered useful in this fight was Rogue, because they were just so outstanding in phase 1 because they could soak the bombs as well as having feint up the entire time while all the shit was coming down from the sky. In phase 2, they could kite the super fast siege vehicle, and they could do that pretty much all day, as well as they could easily keep up with the boss because they could use their movement speed, unless you use the cheese strat, in which case...
Yeah, fair enough. Bring whatever the fuck you want if you use the cheese
that doesn't
strat.
really count. And then, of course, in phase 3, they were absolutely insane at soaking the smashes. You could bring other melee DPS to that fight, no doubts. It's just they were nowhere near as useful. Rogue were just perfect for that fight, and that wasn't a good fight for melee because the boss moved so fucking much. But the other issue with melee is simply how many you can bring to an encounter. If you look at, say, Tyrant and Velhari on Mythic, if you had more than 4 melee, you end up doing so much damage to each other in phase 1 while she's doing the tornado shit, that you're pretty much like, you're either forced to run away from the boss, which means you're doing no damage, or all your healers are going to absolutely fucking hate you.
Yeah, and considering that boss had such a tight DPS check in phase 1, especially pre-ring this is, like on progress, it was such a tight DPS check to get into the next phase, otherwise there was this horrible overlap.
Yeah.
Like, if you had too many melee DPS, it was very unlikely that you'd be able to get there. Even though melee DPS are really good for phase 2 and phase 3, there's nothing wrong with them in those phases. It's just phase 1, it was just like, nope, that's kind of like, we're capping you out here in terms of bringing melee DPS.
It's just there was a limit, and that limit just so happened to be about 4 or 6.
Yeah, you could get away with it, but it's really, like, especially if you're, like, really trying to, like, progress and go with, like, high ranks, you would really struggle with a high amount of melee on that fight.
So the question is really, if they're that bad, then why is there any melee DPS in any raids at all? And the thing is, they're not bad. They really, really aren't bad. Some melee DPS have the most insane abilities to cheese mechanics and generally make things for everyone else a lot easier. If you're on a fight where movement is slow or not at all, melee just thrive because they can just tunnel the boss, they don't have to move at all, and they can just stare at their rotation and make sure they do rotation perfectly. And in a lot of cases, they will do more DPS on average in compared to an average range DPS. Also, from a practical point of view, some melee DPS are great at soaking certain loot types, certain armor types. Like plate is an example. Who else is that going to go to apart from your Holy Paladin and your fucking tanks?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a waste. You want gear on DPS, so your raids DPS is higher. So bring in your warriors, your Death Knights, things like that. They're awesome at soaking up the loot. Otherwise, it's just going to be nuked. So the problem with melee DPS isn't how shit they are, it's how shit some of them are. And because you can't bring lots of them, the spot becomes really, really competitive. If you have your entire roster just full of ranged DPS, there could be a fight potentially that you get to and you just think, I kind of wish we had a couple melee here. But I can't really remember any fight that requires you flat out to have melee, otherwise you cannot do the encounter.
You might want to have abilities that some melee classes have, such as Rogue Cloak or Mass Grip from Death Knights, but it isn't like, oh, I just want any melee DPS here. Any melee DPS here would be great, because normally anything that a melee DPS can normally be done, apart from these cheesy abilities, normally be done by a range just as well,
because
generally.
There's no melee mechanics.
Yeah, exactly.
However, if you have a melee-only roster, you're going to encounter loads of problems because there's loads of mechanics that only focus on ranged DPS. You're only going to have healers, so the healers are going to get bombarded with abilities all the time. They're going to be spending more time focusing on mechanics rather than actually healing the group. And in some cases, there might not actually be enough healers for the game to consider there being enough ranged in the group, and instead the melee are going to get bombarded by ranged mechanics. Which, if you saw our stream the other day when we had 28 Demon Hunters on Arkham on Heroic, doesn't work very well.
Yeah, Shadowfell knockups isn't good. It's just a mess. It's possible, but it's so difficult. And especially in a Mythic environment, that was more of like a jokey thing. In a Mythic environment, no. It's just not going to work.
And if you add all the other flaws that melee DPS have already on top of everything we just said, then it's obviously you just can't have a melee stack raid. Yeah. That's just how things work. So let's talk about just a normal composition. Let's make a 20-man Mythic composition right now.
Like a perfect one that we'd love to have.
I think just a typical one.
Just an average one.
We're just going to make an average one. So you're always going to have 2 tanks, you're always going to have 4 healers.
Okay.
That leaves 14 DPS spots open, right? Let's put in the normal, consistently decent range DPS in, which is pretty much mandatory when it comes down to Mythic. So let's say 2 or 3 hunters?
Yeah,
let's take 2. Let's take 2 hunters. 3 mages, I'm just going to say that's a standard.
Just going to have 3
that's
mages.
How it's been the entire expansion.
They've been so good. Yep. They're always good mages.
Let's throw in 2 warlocks. They're not actually looking that spectacular right now, but let's just throw in 2 warlocks. Shadow Priests obviously look insane right now. You'll probably be taking 1 or 2. We'll just take 1 for this example. Boomkins, typically, you'd always have 2. We're just going to take 1. Elemental Shamans.
We won't take any for now, but once if you want to, you can.
Yeah.
You probably won't, but you can.
Okay, so with that roster, which consists of 2 Hunters, 3 Mages, 2 Warlocks, what did we say, 1 Priest?
Yep.
1 Priest, 1 Boomkin, no Shamans.
Yep.
That will only leave you 5 DPS spots for melee, right?
And the thing is, this isn't like an extreme example. Like, maybe the class stacking on what we're saying is maybe a little extreme, but in terms of how many range DPS, that's average. Like, the amount of people there, it's average to have roughly that many range DPS. So we're left with 5 melee DPS spots.
And in my opinion, that could be even lower. That could easily be 4 or even 3 in
depending
a very
on the
extreme
encounter.
case.
Yeah.
But let's say 5, and we have 9 classes to choose from. So rogues are pretty much still the powerhouse of cheese that they've always been, with all their fucking mobility thrown on top of it. So you're always going to want a rogue. And also, of course, they have 3 DPS specs. The chance that one of them is going to be good and they're actually do some significant damage with it is pretty damn high.
Yeah, even though they have kind of nerfed rogues a little bit with their cloak, they're still incredibly
They're still
strong.
rogues.
Yeah, they're still rogues.
So that's take 2. I don't think that's abnormal.
Okay, well, 1 or 2. Okay, let's just say 2 for this example.
Death Knights are in a similar boat to rogues, I'd say. Maybe not as strong, but again, they can just pick up all the plate loot. Let's throw one of those in.
And you've got AMS, and you've got their grip abilities, which can be useful on certain fights. So yeah, why not?
Warriors, of course, are really useful as well. They have really consistent cleave and execute, and the only other class that has execute is Shadow Priest.
Yeah, so execute is going to be
rallies
like
and all that sort of shit. Let's throw one of those in as well.
Okay.
So that leaves us 1 spot left in your raid for all the other melee specs. So you can take a Rep Paladin, which I think is a very strong option because of the 3 buffs with Wisdom, Might, and Kings. Kings obviously is a Sacred Shield. You've got Might, which is basically multi-strike with a damage increase.
Yeah, weird multi-strike.
And then you have Wisdom, which is just, getting your mana back, so that's great for your healers. So that's really, really nice. The option that they can buff 3 people in your raid, as well as just do normal damage. The only thing with Rets at the moment, apparently they're really boring. I can't comment on this at all because I've never played
a little bit of Ret. I played Ret in the past before. They maybe are a little bit more boring. I don't play Ret as a main though, and to be honest, their damage numbers, a lot of people are just saying this a bit shit.
Which is probably the only thing that matters when it comes down to Mythic.
It really does, but of course we can't really comment on that. They'll probably hot fix it, or maybe the fucking artifact will make it amazing, And
then of course Ret Paladins are really great as well because they help soak plate gear, and if you haven't got Warriors and Death Knights in your raid, then yeah,
sure, why not?
They're going to get really beefy really quick. They still provide utility as well. They still bring bops and stuff like that, but so do the other Paladin specs. You're almost guaranteed to have a Holy Paladin in your raid, maybe even 2.
Yeah, next expansion, Holy Paladins are looking like they're still going to be the tank healers.
You're still going to have one,
and they have Sacrifice, whereas Ret Paladins no longer have Sacrifice. They still do have bot, but they don't have Sacrifice anymore, which is something to take into account.
Another option is, of course, your Survival Hunters. This spec doesn't really make any sense because the only thing they bring that the other Hunters don't is traps. And those traps in themselves aren't really that fantastic. The slow trap might be useful somewhere, but there's lots of other slows in the game that can be done by other classes.
It's very niche. Like, you may once want to bring a Survival Hunter in because, oh god, traps are just ridiculous for this fight, but I really don't see it happening. It's possible, but I wouldn't bring it to a standard comp.
And of course, if the range specs are better, why are you playing the melee version?
Yeah, exactly.
You can bring Enhancement Shamans. Their speed totem is kind of nice, I guess.
Yeah.
And they do... I'd say they do semi-consistent damage, and they were looking pretty good on the alpha.
Mm-hmm.
But apart from that, they don't really bring anything else. They don't bring any extra cheese. They don't even have that many significant damage reductions. Feral Druids are almost in the exact same boat. I guess they have a bit of utility with their blink, but they don't really buff the raid apart from stampeding raw. Windwalker Monks are again in the same boat as Enhancement Shamans and Feral Druids, except they don't bring any raid cooldowns whatsoever. And the last class available is Demon Hunters, and Demon Hunters right now pretty much have the best mobility in-game.
Yeah, one of the highest at least.
It's like they have crazy mobility, and they are pulling some pretty sick numbers as far as we can see. Sadly, one downside of Demon Hunters is, of course, they do share leather gear. If they were sharing mail gear, it would have been so much better. I think you could easily fit like 2 of them in your raid if they were sharing mail gear, because typically it's only Hunters, and then it looks like, well, who else is taking it?
The Shaman.
Resto Shaman. Well, it don't really matter. He's a fucking healer. He doesn't need gear. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame that isn't the case. But, of course, with a new class as well, think about Monks when they first came out, overpowered as fuck. When Death Knights first came out, overpowered as fuck. Is it going to happen with the Demon Hunter?
Yeah.
It looks to be the case so far.
And of course, Demon Hunters do have that darkness ability,
which is just
it's kind of like
it's like a fake 20% damage reduction.
Yeah, it's like a smoke bomb that makes it so you're 20% less likely to be hit by an ability, so you have like a 20% chance to dodge it, which is probably, it might reduce damage across your raid by 20%, but unless it's like ongoing ticking damage, it's not as good. It's still alright, like why not?
It's better than nothing.
Yeah, it's better than not having
It's better than a speed tome.
Yeah, it really is. It definitely is. And considering how mobile Demon Hunters are already, in all fairness, Enhancement Shamans did actually get a buff to their movement abilities. You've got that talent that like pushes you
forward. You've got that jump forward and
it's
you
like
still got Ghost Wolf and things like that, but it's not Demon Hunter.
Yeah, it isn't.
So after going through that, I think you'll see that, there's a lot of specs that'll be sitting on the bench.
It is.
And it's probably quite important that we make this clear now as well. I did say at the start of like how this sort of affects normal and heroic, and it doesn't. But I think we should make that even clearer now. These classes aren't shit. You can easily bring them to heroic and normal. You can bring them to mythic.
Yeah, you can.
It's just, if you can bring the other classes, why not?
If you can. That's the main thing. If you can. Not everyone, of course, has... there's lots of guilds that do mythic that don't have like 5 million ults and all this shit.
And there is going to be some people in the comments that be like, I've got an Enhancement Shaman in my raid. He does really, really sick damage.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine. He probably does. He probably does really, really good damage. But if he was that good on another class that is just flat out better than his class, why isn't he?
Yeah, like it would be a better situation.
But that's the mentality you have to come when it comes down to Mythic. If you want to be
like
competitive with other guilds,
if
you want to be competitive with other guilds. If you're just playing because you really like that class, then great. This doesn't really affect you.
Oh yeah, no. Half of the time, especially when we get these questions on stream, what class should I play and all that shit. Generally speaking, stick with the class you actually like to play because you're more likely to do shit tons of damage with it and everything like that and actually enjoy your raiding experience. But if you're trying to be, like, as we've said, like going for like really high ranks and all that stuff, that's where, oh no, we're not bringing Enhancement Shaman. Sorry, it's just too shit, as an example. They might be amazing, whatever. We're just flat out not bringing them. We have to bring rogues.
That's why this is just a Mythic problem.
Yeah, and even then, is it really even a problem?
What does it matter?
Well,
is that what you're saying?
It's not that it necessarily doesn't matter, but is it kind of like that's just kind of how the design of the game is maybe supposed to be, where you're just supposed to pick whatever the best specs are?
It's very, very hard for them to balance the entire game.
Oh, God,
It's very, very hard for them to make every single class and spec do the exact same numbers and have the exact same abilities, because if that was the case, the game would be boring. What's the point of classes? They're supposed to feel unique and they're supposed to be different. And I think the game does that pretty well.
Yeah,
and the specs have a lot of similarities, especially when you look at things like healers. But ultimately, every class and spec does feel different. And that's why some people do pick one thing and only stick with it because they just love it. It just suits them, and that's how they want to play the game. And that's perfectly fine. So really, no, it doesn't matter that much, but it is kind of sad.
It is a little sad that...
It's sad that there's this many classes that are fun to play, because I think they are fun to play. I've played Enhancement Shaman in the past, and I've played it on beta. I think it's fucking really fun. And the same with Elemental Shaman, which... I don't know where it is right now, to be honest. But Elemental Shamans, I mean, I know we're talking about melee only, but Elemental Shaman doesn't really see raid spots, and they're fun to play. I know Feral Druid is pretty fun to play.
Yeah,
Ret Paladin looks like shit.
It's a bit shit.
Survival Hunters look fun, though.
The Survival Hunters are
So I'm just going
fun.
through the list that I had.
Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, Ret Paladins and all first for being all nice about all these other classes. And like the people out there playing Enhancement Shaman was like, yeah, it is fun to play. And then the Ret Paladin watcher is just like, oh, he's about to talk about Ret. And we're like, it's fucking terrible.
Even though I said it's shit, I don't actually know. Like I said, I haven't played it yet.
It's not very fun.
So yeah, I just think it's sad that those classes are on the bench when it does come down to progression. If there is some solution to this problem, and they can integrate it into the game and it doesn't affect raiding or it doesn't have massive implications for the rest of the game, it would be brilliant. Well, why not?
There is a couple of things that I've kind of thought of while you've been talking, maybe that you could kind of do. These are very like half-baked ideas and more just like kind of a start maybe of what we could do. One thing potentially is that you could make it so the classes that maybe don't have the strong utility. So let's talk about, like, come on now, Rogues and Cloak is like ridiculous and Feint is super strong. Even when you're increasing the cooldown on these things, they're still really good. Like Cloak of Shadows got nerfed down to 1.5 minutes instead of 1 minute, and they're still ridiculously good. You still want to bring a Rogue. Whereas on, let's just take Feral Druid as an example, not to pick on them or anything like that, but let's take Feral Druid where maybe like one of their main raid cooldowns is Stampeding Raw. Comparing a movement speed increase to something that can completely negate a mechanic, like generally a Stampeding Raw, its effectiveness is to help you move out of a mechanic or get to one place to another in a shorter period of time. It doesn't really stop a mechanic from happening, whereas a Rogue, it's ridiculous how good it can be.
So
like, if you take on Zul'Horak and those black holes, lob the rogue in, they cheat death it. That's not even with cloak. You just lob them in there with cheat death, and it's fine.
So the only way that you could make a feral druid in this example that we're using now, the only way that you could make them as viable as the rogue is you give them a similar ability or something that helps them counter something, or you just make them flat out do way more damage than the rogue.
I don't think necessarily buffing the damage part of it is right, but I like the idea
that makes them, it makes them more likely to get a spot.
Yeah, but what would end up probably happening is that you'd bring the rogues in on the fight where you just want them to cheese, and that's it. You wouldn't give a fuck, because it's by the rogue cheesing the ability, it's a damage increase to the entire raid, and that you might want to maybe balance it rogues around that. But when you get to a fight where they're not doing that, and you are still playing a rogue as a main, you're just fucked, because now you're suddenly doing
on the bench,
you're doing half the damage, and there's nothing for you to actually help the rest of the group do. What I think would maybe be good, like as an example for Feral Druid, is give them something that is maybe as strong as Cloak, not the same thing, because it would be boring if every melee DPS spec had Cloak or Cheat Death or whatever. Give them something as strong as that. Maybe something like Rallying Cry. That's a ridiculously strong ability.
Give them a raid cooldown.
Give them some form of raid cooldown.
There isn't a speed increase that is totally situational.
Yeah, and maybe it's good in like most situations. It's okay in most situations, just like Rallying Cry is. It's good in most situations. And same Smoke Bomb. It's okay. It's not too bad, even though that's gone in Legion now. But it can be exceptional in these niche situations, and it can like kind of help carry. And maybe if you gave each class that. So like Bop for Rep Paladins. If you made Bop only available for Rep Paladins, it will make Rep Paladins like way more enticing to bring, but then Holy Paladins might get kicked out.
But the problem with doing that, by adding all these unique abilities to all these individual classes, like you said, like Cloak, that might actually make them all required. And as you said, that might mean that you're going to be in for one fight, and you could be on the bench for the rest of the fights. Yeah,
and that might actually be... So it might make it more awkward, and to be honest, it might end up being like the mechanic has to be countered by that kind of sort of ability.
It could fuck up game design.
Yeah, like because
raid design at
with
least.
Black Hole in Zul'Horak, that was kind of meant to be done by a group of people. It wasn't really meant to be done by a rogue, but it ended up that the rogue could cheese it, and it made the fight a lot easier.
I think you were supposed to split your raid up into 3.
Yeah, something like that. It was something exceptionally like it would add a much higher complexity level to the fight, and you could just cheese it, and that's fine. Like rogues made it more simplistic, which increased overall like output of the raid, and it made it so the rest of the mechanics were more manageable. Whereas I can never see Druid Stampeding Raw doing that. They don't have the potential to be like as helpful. But yeah, definitely, if you make it so that every class has this, then they might go into a fight where it's just like, oh no, you need the Druid version of Cloak to deal with this. And it's kind of like, okay, well, sorry, Rogue, we have to bring the Druid in now. It's just like, it might just switch it around and make it kind of shit. But you know what I mean? I think it'd be nice if... So maybe it isn't that Druids get Cloak. Maybe they just make it so the Stampeding Roar is just up way more often. Or maybe they just give like a passive movement speed increase to the raid. Imagine that, a 20% movement speed increase on the entire raid the whole time a Feral Druid's in there.
That's cool.
That's actually really strong, but not broken. It's something that might be really, really nice. And in some places, it might cheese a mechanic, and that might be excellent. Because then you're like, oh great, Druid, like Feral Druids have like brung something in, you know? Yeah. But once again, I'm not a fucking game designer, and these are just small ideas of maybe just giving these like little increases to the classes, maybe little bits of utility to kind of make them a bit more appetizing and attractive for like raid leaders and like composition makers to bring in, because look at all these cool tools, it might be really helpful for a fight. Maybe you could do that.
I like that idea.
Once again, it might
Another idea though is to nerf all the classes with the cheese.
Yeah, no, I
don't think is viable now. I don't think we're interested in it. It would take so much away from the classes that the people that were playing them would be, I think, a little upset.
Yeah, well, I like as a rogue when I was playing it, I love playing rogue not because of like, oh, I'm a rogue and I'm in stealth and shit. It was I love doing all the shit jobs. I'm calling like shit jobs as in soaking black holes, or in Siege of Orgrimmar on the last boss. What was he called? Fucking Garrosh, there we go. Killing the engineers in phase 1. I didn't even do any damage to the boss, but I got this really weird job where you like had to sit up there for ages. That's super cool. Like, and I think a lot of rogue players are expected to do shit jobs, so if you take away their ability to do that, I think a lot of them would be sad. So I don't think that's a good idea.
Another option is to increase raid size.
Really?
So I don't like this idea personally, because I know exactly what the flaw is.
Right.
But if you did increase raid size to say 30, well, you could bring all these shit classes. I know, I'm just going to keep them in this bubble. They're not shit classes, but they are shit classes.
Every time we say shit classes, just do like quotation marks with your finger. So shit classes, you know. Just do that in your head, because that's what we mean when we're saying this.
If you did increase it to 30, then of course you could have way more variety, especially when it comes down to melee. But of course, by doing that, people are still going to bring the things that are decent in comparison to the shit ones. But it does give you more room to just bring pure DPS. So if Feral Druids or Rep Paladins or Enhancement Shamans or Demon Hunters or whatever are just doing, well, not so much Demon Hunters, but if they're doing crazy high damage, then you can just bring them.
Yeah.
Especially if the raids, even though they have 30 people, the mechanics are scaled for less than that. So say they're scaled for 20 or 25 people, then you can bring 5 people just to do damage.
But course,
But that is a problem because, the game would be shit. Because they would have a load of people in your raid not doing anything ever. And the encounters would just be shit.
Yeah. But maybe it may be something like increase. I generally just think the fights just need to be more melee friendly. Like, although they are moving towards this, and as you said, like with the reduction of casting on the move for ranged and, the higher mobility of melee DPS, apart from Death Knights, you get like Wraith Walk, and otherwise they're a bit fucked, unfortunately. You got those like two things working together. Like, that really helps melee quite a lot and makes them a lot more like, some fights are, some of them I'm kind of considering, this actually could be a really good melee fight. As an example, Hansgar and Franzok, that fight would have been in a really, really crazy good melee fight if you couldn't, like, stand in between the belts.
Yeah. And if the mobs didn't jump away.
And if the mobs didn't jump all over the fucking room. Yeah. So, like, things like that, fights are becoming, to an extent, you're kind of going, this might be actually a shit ranged fight every now and then.
If you look at the fights we've looked so far on testing, we've done every single boss apart from Gul'dan. Gul'dan's the only boss that isn't available for testing, didn't come up once, won't be available for testing before, of course, the raids actually come out, and then you'll get to see him. And there isn't any fight that you particularly think melee are going to be shit. I think Tichondrius melee is almost going to be needed for certain strategies.
Yes. I
think melee is going to be actually kind of needed, but then again, it's not going to be like you need 8 of them. It's going to be you need maybe 4 of them. But apart from that, I don't think any fights are actually bad for melee. But still, you're going to want to bring the range. Unless they change it so those melee that are set out have something else that they can bring to the table rather than just damage.
Overall, I hope we're wrong.
I hope we're wrong.
Because it'll be great to see some sleeper hits within these, like, less used melee classes.
Well, it'd be nice to see these classes come back, but not come back for the reason that they do more damage.
Yeah.
Because like Windwalker Monks, why did you see them in Heimel? Because they just did damage.
And they did...
And they were amazing on Margok.
Exactly. Their utility was really good for a particular fight.
As soon as their damage was normalized, as they put it, which it wasn't, it was just fucking nerfed to the ground 5 times, you just didn't see them ever again until like maybe Maiden's Mythic, because they were kind of useful because there's 3 targets up the entire time and Earth, Wind and Fire was fucking amazing on it. But apart from that, these classes didn't come back. Enhancement Shamans, again, okay, they were good on Margok. Apart from that, didn't see them.
Yeah.
Feral Druids, didn't see them.
That's one thing, actually. One thing that maybe we didn't talk about is that maybe instead of having flat utility spells, maybe like they could do exceptional damage in certain situations.
But then that doesn't make them viable in every single fight. Whereas things like rogues, they're always viable in every single fight because they just have a damage spec that's reasonable. And then when it comes down to the cheese, well, they can fucking cheese.
Okay, no, yeah, never mind. That's a good point. So yeah, I, as you said, I want to be able to see Windwalker Monks in like the top end. Like, I want to be able to see all of the top end guilds using maybe like loads of different melee DPS specs. Maybe not stacking them because their damage is stupidly high, or maybe not stacking them because their utility and cheat. Because that's what it seems like. You need an excuse to bring melee DPS. I don't want there to be an excuse. I really like playing melee DPS.
And the only way you're going to do that is if they design the fights differently.
Yeah, if they just make it more melee friendly. I think that's the best way of going about it.
And you could have melee oriented mechanics.
There doesn't seem to be many of them. There's some mechanics that melee generally end up doing.
It would just make more sense because, of course, there is 9 melee specs available, and there's only 6 range.
Yeah, so...
Where it feels like the ratio should be the complete opposite way round. Because that is pretty much like the ratio of melee to ranged anyway, where it's even like more extreme than that.
So yeah, like maybe because, like, of course, melee do get to deal with mechanics, but it's not mechanics that generally range can't do as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to Zul'Horak, which I've done, like, it's just on my mind today, I don't know why. But melee DPS on that fight, they generally have the job of kind of blocking imps. They have, like, they do control imps with the mass grip and then they stun them, generally speaking.
Yeah,
that's
work out some form of stun rotation between the tanks and the melee,
Yeah, we have the AoEs from Boomkins and stuff like that. And then they block any that go through to make sure they don't go to the tank and make sure they don't like spawn patches out in ranged or anything like that. So they kind of have a job like that. that's like a mechanic that melee really thrive on, because having range do that would kind of suck. But once again, there's so many more mechanics, I would say, that is range orientated on that fight.
Yeah, well, you have to
like
do
you have to do
chains.
chains, and like you need, like, to be honest, that's another example. Mages are cheesing the fuck out of that, or hunters, to try and get it back
Shadow
to the
Priest.
mages. So yeah, you were kind of cheesing the fuck out of the chains. And even then, the black holes, that could be done by warlocks if you wanted to. Warlocks wouldn't be very happy about it, but you could. And you've got all of the bouncy ads that you can't really let in melee because it's super hard to try and control them when they're in there. And it's just all of this other shit that you have to do as like range. Generally, the fight feels much like all fights feel very range orientated, and sometimes as a melee DPS. I've done all the fights in Hellfire Citadel, and sometimes as a melee DPS, it just feels like you're doing your damage rotation and hoping that the range does their job. Sometimes it does feel like that, as long as you don't like fuck up to the big ball of fire that everyone has to avoid. Sometimes you're waiting for the range to do it correctly. And it just feels like maybe melee don't get enough jobs that are good for melee, maybe.
Yeah, so
maybe
if they design fights with like melee only mechanics. If they made it so you have to have 4 melee on this fight at least in order to deal with this ability, but it just so happens the more melee you have might actually make it easier for you to deal with. Because if a ranged DPS stands in that circle, they take a shit ton of damage because they're not classified as a melee. I don't know. That sounds absolutely terrible.
Yeah, that's a terrible... We're not very good designers.
But we like talking shit.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of this fucking show. But there we go. It's just something that's been on my mind, and I think they could change it. And I think they're getting better at it.
They are.
But the thing is, they have to get better at it because they keep fucking adding more melee classes.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, a lot of people just like, oh, yeah, Fat was complaining because of blah, blah, blah. It's not really a huge problem. Massive
it just
one.
only is for Mythic.
It really, and even then, I'm playing ranged, you're playing a healer. We don't have anything to worry about because we're not playing a melee DPS.
Maybe I wouldn't play a healer if melee were actually, if I could fucking play Windwalker or Enhancement Shaman. Maybe I'd want to do that, Alex.
No, you wouldn't. You'd heal forever.
No, yeah.
But either way, like, I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, and maybe it doesn't need changing, maybe it does, but all I want to see is just more different specs in the top end of raiding. More variety, because I like being able to see a random druid every now and then. That's good. Or fucking a Windwalker monk. I haven't seen one of those in a while, so it'd be nice to see him.
That's our thoughts and feelings on the subject. Not to go too much deeper because I think we're sort of going around in circles and rambling a bit now. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode today. If you do, smack a like on it, and also let us know in the comments what you think about the state of melee. Are we completely wrong? Are we elitist dickheads? It's entirely possible. We need to be told.
It's highly probable, actually, according to some of our videos.
And also a quick announcement before we do go. We are now on Patreon. If you wish to support us, go check out the page. There'll be a link in the description. Most of you understand how Patreon works. We was going to do like a dedicated video where we're going to talk about it. We're probably going to be releasing that some point after Gamescom. We don't really have time to get that video nailed down before we go because we want to work on other things that are a little bit more interesting, such as the Emerald Nightmare bosses. They actually came up for testing again. They came up on normal mode, so we have footage for both of them now. They'll be out while we're at Gamescom probably.
Yeah, that's the idea.
We'll work out something. We're really busy at the moment. We're live streaming and shit on top of everything as well. So yeah, lots and lots of stuff. Very busy, very exciting time. And of course we are at Gamescom, so come watch all our shit, which we said in the last video. But yeah, fuck me. That was the most fucking unorganized outro ever. Go to Patreon, fucking watch the stream. We're going to Gamescom, 2 videos are coming out. There we go. Summed up.
Was that a list? Is that a list you're going to have coming up on the screen?
Yeah.
Point 1, Patreon. Point 2, we're live streaming. Point 3, we're going to Gamescom. And point 4, all of the above.
Yeah.
All right, sweet.
So thank you very much for watching, guys. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching.